this up. Don't have some visibility today.
That is an ultimate. Tyler. I think if anyone's here,
I'm used to that, right?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Well, that's great. I have, I'm on the board at National Geographic, and you may know there's a marathon they run through the Gobi Desert. Do you know about that?
I do.
Yeah. So I'm around people who do really crazy things. What do you think is best?
I mean, I'll the gain up really high.
Does that work?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Super. If not, just let me know. Okay.
I'll see what it sounds like, and then I'll flip it over to the mic directly if I see a problem, and I'll try to let you know.
All right. Super.
We'll do the wireless mic. That's okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Can you have a hard copy you said? I'll just have it in case there's any technical issues while we're going through. Oh, it's my pleasure. Okay. I had a time or two, but I haven't spoken here before. Yeah.
In those bags, I have swag for each solution today.
Okay.
So then when if you want to do the Q&A,
How many do we have?
there are 8.
Okay. Sorry. After you. Hey, Jade, can I get some water?
I have a bottle of water for you already out there.
Perfect.
It's the blue Dasani bottle.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thanks.
You're just going to click that. Don't click these.
There's seats in the front.
Okay.
And to play the video, I should
Come to the front in my class.
Okay.
and the water bottle's on your left. There's
Okay, great. And this works?
one I think is Dr.
Fantastic. Okay, yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Put it under my door.
Okay. It's not showing on here, so it'll be on there though, right? Hi, Bruce. How are you? Nice to meet you. I'm Jean. All right, super. Yeah, I love that. Are you kidding? Yeah, absolutely. All right, good. So I came in on the wind and I haven't been in the bathroom. Am I okay hair-wise and everything? And, yeah.
I was looking at that earlier because
Okay.
I was that wind. I was like, oh no,
Yeah,
my hair's
right.
already glittered.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the collar.
Okay.
The 2 pumps on Dr.
Right.
Leal following
Right.
this slide. And
Okay.
then
Yeah, right. Okay. Good. Thanks. I need that. Jane.
Okay, thank you for coming. If you're in the class, please come sit up front.
Look, he said he did. It was muted.
All right. Thank you all for coming. We're super excited to welcome Jean Case today. If you are not in the social entrepreneurship class, I'm Christine Mahoney. I run the social entrepreneurship initiative here at UVA. And we are super excited to have the CEO of the Case Foundation with us. Jean Case is an actively engaged philanthropist, investor, and pioneer in the world of interactive technologies. Her career in the private sector spanned nearly 2 decades before she and her husband, Steve Case, founded the Case Foundation in 1997. The Case Foundation is recognized for its leadership in leveraging new technologies and applying innovative approaches to increase giving, catalyze civic and business participation, and promote innovation, collaboration, and leadership in the nonprofit sector. Jean serves on the National Geographic Society Board of Trustees, as well as the Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure, Snag Films, and BrainScope Company. She's also the advisor to the boards of Harvard Business School's Social Enterprise Initiative, the Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society, Georgetown University's Beek Center on Social Impact and Innovation, the Brain Trust Accelerator, and the U.S. National Advisory Board to the Social Impact Investing Task Force. Jean and her husband Steve both joined the Giving Pledge, which was started by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett in 2010, and they've publicly reaffirmed their commitment to give away the majority of their wealth to fund worthy charitable causes. The same year, Barron's named them on the top 25 best givers list. I know we have a number of students from the philanthropy class here with us. In 2013, Jean was named finalist for the Most Admired Nonprofit CEO, awarded by the Washington Business Journal, and in 2011, she was named Corporate Philanthropist of the Year. The National Conference on Citizenship also honored Jean and Steve in 2011 as Citizens of the Year. And so today she's going to be speaking with us about one of their new cutting-edge campaigns called the Be Fearless campaign. So with that, let's welcome Jean.
Thank you, Dr. Mahoney, and thank you, John Kluge back there, for allowing me to be here today. So hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Feeling good? All right. Well, you heard some of those schools rattled off that I spend time in, but I've spent maybe the last year or two on kind of a circuit, if you will, at different schools, talking about this stuff we're going to talk about today. And I must say, I haven't presented anywhere where the screen's been that high. So if you find me doing this, just don't mind that. But it's kind of fun for me because I've been so many places in the last year or two talking about similar things. It gives me a good sense when I stand in front of an audience to sort of get a feel for what is this school? Who are those kids that are there? How's it different than where I've been? And I really care about one thing, and I say this at the start of every talk, and I found in some schools people go, yeah, and in other schools they go, I really like things to be interactive, okay? I think I bring my best when I feel like people are with me along the way. And I think when I sit in audiences, it's always much more interesting if I feel like I'm part of the dialogue. So although I'm going to go through a deck today, and I'm going to try and do it in a timely fashion, there's a lot of slides and some videos here to break up my voice. I really invite you at any point to raise your hand or even just blurt out if you have a comment or a question as we go through things. So as we get started here, there's kind of an intimidating slide up here, and I must say it's much more intimidating at that height than it normally is. But what I'm going to talk to you today, what I'm going to talk to you about today, is this campaign we've been having at the Case Foundation for about 3 years. It's titled Be Fearless. And while that sounds like kind of just a cool, edgy thing in a campaign, it's actually pretty serious work. And it's about the work of innovation. And what led us to this some number of years ago was an anniversary that we had. And we were asking the big questions of what's broken through? What's behind transformation in people who are about the business of changing the world? Because guess what? It turns out there are a lot of people who sat in rooms like this at an age or a stage that you are and had ideas for how they might go about changing the world. And it's a rare thing that they broke through and there was transformation. And this is my chosen profession now. This is what I've done for 18 years of my life. I actually could argue I've done it my entire career just from a different vantage point, which is really trying to change the world. But specifically since I became CEO of the Case Foundation after we started it, this is all I do. And it kind of blows my mind that I see so much talent, so much money, so much effort going into addressing big, dogging challenges, and it's the rare one that breaks through. So we went to school and we said, we want to know what success looks like. When people actually break through, what's behind that? So we're going to share with you some principles. But I want to just start by saying, Dr. Mahoney, I thank you again for that lovely introduction that I got. I get that introduction from time to time, and it sounds so perfect, doesn't it? It sounds almost like that. And when people are reading those words, I go, really? That's me they're talking about? Because it doesn't feel like me. This actually feels like me. You know, the road to success for anyone who's done anything extraordinary really is paved with failures, with potholes in the road, with pivots and turns, with unexpected changes along the way. And that's really the themes behind Be Fearless that we're going to talk about today. So this is our team at the foundation, and I love showing this slide. We have some of our foundation folks with us today here at the school. But I love showing this slide for a couple of reasons. A, it makes me feel like they're here with me, and I just love our team. We love each other. We have a lot of fun working together. But you might notice they look a little bit like this room, actually. Okay, maybe there's a few more women than men in my picture, but you get the idea. And although it looks maybe like they're similar people of similar age and stage, it's actually a very, very diverse group, and we'll go into that and why that's important as part of this talk. So what is the CASE Foundation anyway? Had any of you heard of the CASE Foundation? And don't politely raise your hand. If you have, raise it. If you haven't, no shame. Any of you heard of the CASE Foundation before today? Oh, yay. That makes me feel good. So our mission is to invest in people and ideas that can change the world. And we're very much animated by this Martin Luther King quote. We do feel what he referred to as the fierce urgency of now in addressing the world's challenges. That's the business that we're in. In terms of sort of buckets or pillars of our work, we've highlighted them here on the left: igniting civic engagement, unleashing entrepreneurship, and revolutionizing philanthropy. But what does it take to be fearless anyway? How could I actually have the nerve to stand up here and call on you to be fearless if you don't feel like you're fearless today? And if you do feel like you're fearless today, how can I stand here and challenge you, implore you to put that fearlessness to work to make a better world? We're going to start with the 5 principles are laid out here. And we have a small video that'll tell you just a little bit more about our Be Fearless campaign.
If you added up all the times you failed, all the times you came up short, would you try again? What if failure wasn't a limitation? What if taking risks was your status quo? What kind of world would you imagine? When global challenges seem overwhelming, we need to create unlikely partnerships, experiment with new thinking, and set audacious goals. To build a better world, to make a real difference, we have to take bigger risks, make bigger bets. And if we fail, and fail again, we have to get right back up, stronger than we were before. To live in a world worth living in, we have to let challenge inspire us. We have to take risks, be bold, and let urgency conquer fear. We have to be fearless.
So I don't know if you picked it up in the video or not, but part of that was walking through 5 principles. And we're going to use our time together today to walk through those 5 principles and to do a little bit of storytelling, doing some very, very short case studies, and maybe play some games too, in which I hope to hear from some of you. So let's start with, the first principle was make big bets and make history. So my question for you as you sit here this morning is, do you have a big bet? If I came around and I had time today to sort of speed date with you guys, and I said, what's your big bet? Do you have one right now that comes to mind? And if you don't, it's really okay. That's why we're having the conversation. And I don't know how long it took me to realize I had some big bets. You know, I'm not sure if someone had stood in front of a room like I am with you today when I was your age and said, what's your big bet? I could have articulated it. I can see now I had a couple, actually 2, that served as my North Star as I went through life. So big bets can be a personal thing, right? I mean, there might be something that is in your personal life that you care a lot about. In fact, you might even see, which is sort of my story, that what your professional big bet is very much your personal big bet. Okay, there's some crossover there because it's just a real area of passion. And I'm a believer in, you know, intentionality is really important. You'll see intentionality plays a role in success in life. And so some of you have, pens and notebooks in front of you. Some of you might have, your phones or your iPads or whatever. I really hope if you don't have a sense of a big bet, that maybe you'll jot something down. And it can be crazy, all right? I invite you to be crazy. We love crazy. But what's a big bet that you might have in your life? Let's look at a couple of big bets. So this is sort of a classic one that's often talked about. I think you probably know in 1961, you guys weren't born yet, I was barely born yet, President Kennedy, a brand new president, by the way, for the most part, went before Congress and delivered an unbelievably bold speech in which he said, "It is our goal to send a man to the moon in this decade and return him safely to Earth." Well, as we're sitting here with all the technology around us, and we've seen the Mars rover, and, we have SpaceX, and just, all kinds of technology, and space is more familiar to us. It's easy to not understand exactly how radical that big bet was. A quote. Take just a minute for you to read that. It was huge. It has yet to be rivaled. Now, why would people say that about that big bet? Because if I can take it in 1961, we didn't have any of even the piece parts that were going to play a role to get us to the moon, much less get us back safely to Earth. We didn't have communications, so we didn't know when the thing left, would we be able to communicate and know what was going on once it went out of our atmosphere? We didn't know what the surface of the moon was like. We didn't have camera technology. The computers then took up rooms like this. Do you really think you could take a computer into space if it was the size of this room? So we had to miniaturize. We had to optimize. We had to build plastics. There were things that weren't even on the whiteboard when this particular big bet was made. But I think you know the ending. The ending is, guess what? By the end of the decade, despite, by the way, losing President Kennedy in an untimely assassination, we did send a man to the moon, and we brought him back safely to Earth. And it's funny because I was doing a talk like this, a couple years ago, and I was using this example. And a woman raised her hand in like the fourth row, like I'm hoping some of you guys will comment or whatever. And she said, you said send a man to the moon and inside the decade, but you forgot to say and bring him back safely to Earth. Well, my husband was an astronaut, and trust me, the bring him back safely to Earth was as big a part of that big bet as sending him up there in the first place. And so these little things that we take for granted today really did make a difference back then. I want to talk to you about Malaria No More. Can I see a show of hands of who's heard of Malaria No More or the malaria movement? Yay, all right. Not surprised by that. So we like to show this as a big bet. So what's the name? Malaria No More. I think you get the big bet, right? Eradicate malaria. Malaria has been a really successful campaign that's unique for a variety of reasons. It has a really awesome leader who made a really big bet. But more importantly, he created a remarkable collaborative that included things like the World Health Organizations, all the NGOs working on it, some of the usual suspects. But then he brought in American Idol, and in one night raised $84 million for support and exposed the campaign to 50 million people in the United States who before that maybe weren't so focused on this issue of malaria in the world. He involved the NBA. He involved the World Soccer Association. He got we could go right down the list. ExxonMobil has a full-time malariologist now, in Africa. The problem was pretty concentrated into sub-Saharan African countries, and his goal was to cover the countries with bed nets. He has a great talk. If you want to look him up, his name is Ray Chambers, and he talks about creating coverage for 800 million Africans with these bed nets that could save children who were dying, if you're under 5, at the rate of about 1 million a year as he got started in malaria. Ray had absolutely no background in malaria, didn't have much knowledge of Africa before he got started. But what he had was a really big idea and a collaborative that he put together. He was willing to take risks, And he really let urgency conquer fear. And so where we are today is malaria deaths have decreased by 58%. I think the hope was by 2015 we'd have malaria no more, but it looks like now maybe 2017 is going to be the date. But a series of unlikely partnerships. Experiment early and often is the second principle to be fearless. Bless you. So if I asked you, just like I said, do you think you're fearless? Do you have a big bet? Do you know your own tolerance for risk? So if you think you do, yes. Anybody? Do you think you know where you come down on tolerance for risk? No? Maybe not sure? Well, it's not uncommon not to be really sure where you come down, and it's actually more common to be afraid of risk. And it's not something necessarily to be ashamed of. But here's the big news. If you're in this room, I think you want to use your time and your talent and your chosen profession in some way to make a better world. And so that probably means some breakthroughs or some transformations like we've been talking about. But guess what? The really good stuff seldom comes out of the comfort zone. The really big breakthroughs, as we've been talking, often come from what we call the courage zone. Okay, you've stepped down into a place where you're no longer comfortable. And sometimes they come from this place called the terror zone. And that's where you're really now, you're just not sure, and you are taking a really, really big risk. There's measured risk and reckless risk, and we're going to talk just a little bit about that. But there's a book called Stop Playing Safe that I borrow from for these slides particularly. And I like this chart because remember I said I'm about writing things down. So let's assume you have a big challenge that you're facing, a big decision that you're facing. It might be a career decision, but it might be a personal decision. I mean, it can be almost anything that you're faced with. And it's going to involve whether or not you take a risk. But to understand if that's a good risk or not, don't you kind of need to know where are you on the risk curve? And I like this exercise here because it gives you a sense of, if you began to focus on some of these things, put your decision at the top. All right, I don't know where you are in your schooling. I know we have, can I see how many undergrads are here? How many grad students? Okay, good, it's a really great mix. So you're going to face a decision. It might be an internship this summer, it might be your career, it might be, whether you go to grad school eventually, et cetera, what major you have, there are decisions here. And if you literally made a list of, well, how do I approach this? You can begin to understand what your fear tolerance level is. And this works really interesting for me because although people might look at my own life and say that I took a lot of risks, I actually am not very risk tolerant. What I'm good at is flexing the self-discipline muscle to be intentional about the risks I'm taking. And that's essentially what this chart is about. It helps you sort of understand where you are on risk and how you will approach the problem. We also, as people, it's very natural for us, our brains are made to kind of run away from risk. And why would that be? Well, think about, how it was in the earliest days of man, right? We're running from things like lions. We're in a sort of very dangerous situation on a routine basis. And there had to be something in our brains that said, looks bad, danger ahead, run. But we don't live in that world for the most part anymore. Things are pretty safe as we wake up every day. But our brains haven't necessarily adapted to the new world that we live in. So it's very common when facing or looking at a risk. Let's say you have a brilliant idea. Not just necessarily to start something, but maybe you've just now taken a role with a traditional organization and you have a really great idea that you want to pitch as a breakthrough opportunity for the organization. Well, guess what's going to come immediately? All the reasons why you shouldn't do it. All the risks you're taking, all the downsides of if I do this, blah, blah, blah. But what doesn't happen often enough are the next two things. You don't commit yourself to say, but what if the upside actually works? What does that look like? And then the next one, what is the downside if I do nothing? And so these last two questions that are up here often can be the difference between getting you out of that comfort zone or letting you rest in that worry of the downside of taking a risk. So the whole point of Be Fearless, and the reason we're talking about risk, is because remember, we're on the point of experiment early and often, try new things. And sometimes when I stand with a group like this, you know, if they're honest, they'll say, I'm not sure I'm an innovator. I want to be an innovator, but I'm not sure I'm an innovator. But you know what? Every single person in this room is an innovator in one way or another and has the potential to be an extraordinary innovator. Why do I believe that? Guess what innovators do? It's pretty simple. They just solve problems. And I think there's this sense that you have to have an aha or a Thomas Edison moment, and you don't. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the coolest cooler? Anybody? 13. Thank you. And by the way, very fearless of you to speak up. I've been waiting for someone to speak up, and I invite others too. So I put the coolest cooler up here because I bet when you're thinking about changing the world, you might not be thinking about bringing a new cooler to the world. So I'm not sitting here to say this is to change the world. I am sitting here to say this is innovation. And what is the coolest cooler? Well, it's this guy who went to the beach a lot and had parties and got really frustrated with how all the stuff he had to schlep when he wanted to have a beach party. And he's like, wait, why do I need like a separate blender and then there's like no electricity and, you know, my cell phone always dies halfway through the party and there's no way to play my music. And so you kind of get the picture. And he's like, why wouldn't somebody just put all that in one cooler, in one device? Well, I can do that. So he put his project on Kickstarter. He intended not to raise a whole heck of a lot of money, but enough to get him started. And what happened? This is last year. It just got broke this past week, but before this week, it was the record on Kickstarter. You said it, $13 million. The Pebble Watch just broke it. All right, you go. 20 million. The Pebble Watch is the new record. But the reason I want to talk about the coolest cooler is not because I'm really encouraging you guys to go out and, you know, make better coolers. But really, if he could do this, and if he could whip up excitement for a cooler innovation, imagine what you guys can do. Imagine what you can do. Anyone could have invented the coolest cooler. It didn't take a genius. And so that's innovation too. We have the dishwasher up here. This is a company I sit on the board of that you heard about down on the right, that image. Those are leads on a brain. The innovation of that company is for traumatic brain injury and concussion, it turns out that EEG is affected by that. So if you can baseline patients, you know what their standard EEG is, or let's say baseline a soccer player before he or she goes out in the field, baseline a soldier before he or she goes out into the battlefield, you know their normal brainwave activity. Ooh, now an event has happened. How do we know if they're concussed? How do we know if they have a brain bleed? Well, guess what? EEG is the new technology that does it, and that's a picture of it. Now, here's the really interesting thing about this company. If you suffer, and how many of you have had a concussion in the room? Just curious, because you'll relate more personally. Okay, it's not uncommon to see a room with that many. So I don't know what your experience was when you had your concussion, but it would not be uncommon in 2015, okay, in professional sports as well as non-professional sports, to use some of the same protocols to determine your concussion that were used 50 years ago. Now, if we can innovate on a cooler, and if we can watch our pizza being, you know, going through the oven and being delivered online, can't we come up with some new innovative solutions for, you know, significant social challenges like concussion and TBI to use this new technology for good? And that's what BrainScope does. So how does innovation happen? I mentioned it's not always an aha moment. The example we like to use is Thomas Edison, you know, and this is certainly true of me. I think if I had been asked before we really started getting heavily into the study of innovation, well, you know, who's the greatest innovator of all time? I'm sure he would have made it on a top list of mine, and it wouldn't surprise me if he might make it on your top list too. But you know what? He wasn't, in the sense that there were 24 patents issued for the light bulb before Edison's. In fact, his quote is, I'm quite correctly described as more of a sponge than an innovator. So if you're sitting here this morning and you're saying, you know what, I'm not sure, this afternoon, I guess it is now, I'm not sure I'm an innovator. You know what you can do? You can look around and see what things have had like little inkling of an idea there. Go to school on some really cool things that you've seen and say, well, how can I take it faster or further or drive it into the mainstream? How can I tweak something that got started? So you don't really always have to think of coming up with a first idea to innovate. In fact, it's really celebrated in innovation if you've taken some fits and starts from other things and you just pick them up and make them mainstream. How many of you guys know this book, The Lean Startup? Okay, good. It's pretty well known. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but for those of you that don't know it, there's a concept in it called minimum viable product. And the whole idea is really asking a simple question. How can I minimize the effort, the time, the money I put into trying something before I actually commit to it? And that's really what minimum viable product is about. So you see here, there's this little chart which tries to describe it, which says it starts with an idea, right? So you kind of build the idea in your head and you have some idea of what it is you're going to do. It maybe involves code, maybe it doesn't. You set about, as you throw it out there, you measure it, you get some data to find out what's working or what's not. You learn from that and you start the whole process again. We like to tell a couple of stories in what we call MVP. And I must say, I wish in my technology career we had understood the concept of MVP, because in the tech world I grew up in, we had versions, okay? And a version could take a year or two, all right? So you'd build a new version of your software, let's say. You spend a year or two putting in all these different features. You have to decide at what date is it the hard cut line. You close the hood, or basically finish. Then you ship it, and you hope and you pray. Now, there are beta tests and things like that, but this whole concept of not going to all that effort and having the availability in this day and age to understand is what you're on going to work or not is really interesting. So Zappos is an interesting story, and for those of you who know the Lean Startup, you may know the Zappos story. Zappos is, of course, an online big shoe seller, broken through with a lot of success. But before it got started, the founder wasn't sure that people would buy shoes online. Makes sense to me. I mean, I think if you'd come to me and said, I have this idea for selling shoes online, I probably would have come up, even though I tend to be an optimist, with a bunch of objections for, don't I want to put my foot in that shoe? Aren't shoes something you really need? So he knew there was going to be some issues, and he questioned himself whether this was viable or not. So he went out to some stores, and he took some pictures of shoes, and he created sort of a one-page website, and he made it look like he had started an online shoe business. But he had an arrangement with these retailers that he was going to take these pictures of shoes, and if he actually sold any, he'd come back and buy the shoes from the retailers, okay? Well, guess what happened? He found out there was a tremendous appetite for shoes online. He also found out what kind of shoes sell better online. He got a sense of even the sort of fulfillment process, because he was personally then going and buying the shoes and shipping them out to people. He did all that before a company was started, really before there was truly a Zappos. And some people call that the Wizard of Oz effect. And you've probably heard that. I see some heads shaking. And that is, can you put something up that sort of looks like the finished so that you can begin to interact with your customer base or the people you're trying to serve to get a sense that this is going to fly or this isn't. If you haven't heard the Zappos story, it's an interesting one to read in more detail. Similarly, Dropbox put up something. It wasn't actually the Dropbox application that allows you to store big files and trade them, okay? It was something that was a descriptor of that. And in that one day when they put up what kind of looked like Dropbox, they really weren't trying to fool people. They were trying to put up the descriptor of what it would be. They went from 3,000 interested people to 75,000 interested people. But more importantly, not only did they realize their idea could go to scale before they invested in the company and went all the way with building the product and the application, is they also found out it could have some real mainstream appeal. So the other one we talk about from time to time is Gmail, which spent a couple of years just as a beta product before it actually launched. So this whole idea of you don't have to be all in, I find it very freeing, right? Because you can actually try some stuff before you put a bunch of money in it, before you put too much time and effort in, to see am I on to something there or I'm not. So in innovation, we've talked about having the big bet. We've talked about trying new things and taking risks. But are you really ready for naysayers and setbacks, no matter what it is you're trying to take forward? So, in a Western Union internal memo, this telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. Let me talk to you about a man named Dr. John Leal. Has anyone heard of Dr. Leal before? Okay, I'm not surprised. He's not well known. So he's had a really interesting history in our nation. So it turns out, if we were sitting in this room 100 and some years ago, the average life expectancy was 47 years of age. 47. Okay, I'm 55. I wouldn't be here anymore, chances are. But what really was driving that was waterborne diseases, which were responsible for half of all the deaths in major cities. And like, it's hard to imagine that today, that you would, not that there were always taps, but that you'd go to a source of water, and when you made the choice to drink it, it could kill you, and particularly, and most importantly, your children. They were the most vulnerable, of course, like all disease. So Dr. Leal was a Princeton-educated physician. His father had died from dirty water in a camp in the Civil War. And the reason I say that is because when we find a fearlessness, when we find people have found their passion and they're ready to go forward now, sometimes when you peel back that onion, you find it's a personal thing. It's something personal that touched them, that really drove them then to be the innovators that they would become. And in Dr. Leal's case, it was, I'm sure, the loss of his father to dirty water. So he became this physician. He ended up working, of all things, for the public health system. And there was a huge problem in Jersey City. They'd had a very serious and urgent problem with dirty water that was creating a big problem in the city. And it had to be fixed, and they had 90 days to fix it. Well, unbeknownst to others, Dr. Leal had been paying attention to things that were happening in Europe where they had introduced chlorine into water with successful results. And he brought some of those trials to a private lab where he had collaborators that were very diverse, okay, secretly testing the idea of putting chlorine in water. It was a radical concept. Nowhere in the United States had this been tried, and the public opinion was strongly against it. These are some of the quotes of the day, okay? The idea itself of chemical disinfection is repellent. People said people would die. There was just no appetite whatsoever. But guess what he did? He did it anyway. He poured chlorine into the public water system, and what was the result? Death rates for waterborne diseases look like this. John Leal was fearless. Now, we could have an interesting debate about whether John Leal was reckless or whether that was measured risk. Because we know the studies he had looked at, because we know the trials he had seen go live in Europe, I personally think it was measured risk. But the case went to court, because remember, he didn't ask permission, he just did this, okay? And he won in the courtroom. And you can see the result. And so many times where we see, again, a great example of a transformational breakthrough, there was a fearless innovator behind it. You guys know this guy? Elon Musk. So Elon is kind of interesting as an innovator. He's built 3 companies whose value is worth over $1 billion, 3 different companies. And I'm not so thrilled, by the billion thing. That's not what jazzes me about Elon. What jazzes me about Elon is these companies are changing the world. Companies like Tesla, PayPal, Solar City. Elon is an innovator, and I thought maybe we should hear from him.
Well, it's like the Nike slogan, just do it. That's, just showing up is half the battle. Just, you got to try hard to do it, and don't be afraid of failure. You also need to be rooted in reality. So you shouldn't, it's easy to get high in your own supply, as Scarface said. You've got to not be afraid to innovate, but also don't delude yourself into thinking something's working when it's not. Or you're going to get fixated on a bad solution.
Pregnant pause.
Yeah, and I think also just don't be afraid of new arenas. You can get a book, learn something, and experiment with your hands, and just make it happen. Find a way or make a way to get something done.
Of course, you build products that don't work. We started PayPal. The initial product was an infrared beaming device on Palm Pilots for sending money. It was voted one of the 10 worst business ideas in 1999. And 1999 was a year where there were many bad ideas in technology. And so there was a product failure, but the team was good. We were able to change and do something different. I think people have a lot of latitude to making up for mistakes, for pivoting, for changing. It's not like you only get one chance in this life. You get many chances so long as you keep trying. If you get hung up on failure, and if you think you don't have another chance, that's what you really don't.
So that's Peter Thiel, the co-founder of PayPal, talking there at the end. And you heard him say it was voted the worst product of 1999. And for those of you that have followed it, as eBay separates from PayPal, PayPal today is tens of billions of dollars in value. But more importantly, it's become a really essential way for consumers to transact. And so he was undaunted by the fact that there were naysayers. Make failure matter. We like to put up a couple of examples. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, the other quote we love from Michael Jordan, or as he tells the story, he was cut from his high school basketball team. And he says he went home, got in a closet, and cried. Now, you gotta admit, man, if you have a situation that's so devastating to you that you go home and hide in your closet and cry, wouldn't you think I'd never try again? But obviously we're happy Michael Jordan decided to stick with it. My favorite quote around failure, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 things that won't work. And that's really the story of Be Fearless, you guys. It really is. Yeah, you might fail for now, but how do you fail forward? How do you fail fast? How do you pick up from that and take it and make something great? And Albert Einstein, failure is success in progress. Wouldn't we all think about it differently when we failed? If we said, oh, well, I'm just a little closer to success now. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to do a fun little game. These are just going to be quick little hits, okay? I think you guys need to, should we take a little breathing break? Is everybody good? Should we stand for maybe 15 seconds? Let's do that. Why don't we stand up? Shake it out, guys. Shake it out a little bit. It's after lunch. Let's get some energy going. Wave those arms if you need to. All right, we're going to have a little game. So sit back down. I'm asking for some audience participation. I'm going to put up some quotes from some people who encountered failure. See if you can guess who they are. And folks, I'm looking for some fearless souls out there. Just shout them out. There's, don't be afraid if you're not right. This one, by the way, is the hardest one, I think. Yes? Okay, no guessers. Creators of WhatsApp. So they're fired from Facebook, and what happens? Facebook comes back and buys their company for many billions of dollars. Come on. Yeah, thank you, UVA. I knew you had it in you to participate. Oprah. Yes, it was fearless people. Who said that? Yes. Beatles. Imagine if you were the one that wrote that letter. How you feel later. It is Mickey Mouse. It's his creator. Again, I'm super happy he didn't listen to that detractor. Yes, UVA, you are smart, smart, smart. And fearless, too. And do you notice some little gifts are going out? Oh, I did that one, so yeah. I think we have to take that one out, because that was just too easy, isn't it? It's a great question, and this one is total nepotism on my part. My husband, Steve Case. I think he's kind of cute, so I like to put it up there. There you go, J.K. Rowling. Now, this one, oh yeah, so we're going to hear from J.K. Rowling. So J.K. Rowling did a really awesome commencement address at Harvard on the subject of what? Failure. So we're actually going to hear from her twice, but this is the first short clip we're going to hear.
So why do I talk about the benefits of failure?
Can you guys hear?
Simply because failure meant a stripping away of the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me. Had I really succeeded at anything else, I might never have found the determination to succeed in the one arena where I believed I truly belonged. I was set free, because my greatest fear had been realized, and I was still alive, and I still had a daughter whom I adored, and I had an old typewriter and a big idea. And so rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. You might never fail on the scale I did, but some failure in life is inevitable. It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default.
All right, there you go.
Now, I wanted to share with you that when I started Google, with Sergey, as was mentioned, it seems sort of obvious now that we should have done it. But at the time, we were really scared. And we were actually, we were grad students like many of you students. And, we were enjoying getting our PhDs, and we haven't quite finished yet as a result. And although Stanford recently gave us a reinstatement form when we gave a speech there. But at the time, we were really scared, like, oh, we're not going to get our degrees, we're going to start this company, it'll be kind of lame. And, our parents were all upset, and, there were all sorts of issues. And so, one of the things that I'd been through as a student was some leadership training. And one of the things they taught us was to not be afraid of failure. And instead to have the goal to fail a lot quickly, and then eventually you'll succeed. And I sort of took this to heart, and I started a slogan called Healthy Disregard for the Impossible. And actually made you write down sort of the things you would do that were kind of impossible, but you thought you might really accomplish. And that's really stuck with me in everything that I've tried to do. And I think, it was very, very close that we wouldn't have started the company. And I think there are many of you out there in sort of similar situations. Do you want to take a little bit more risk? Do you want to try something out? And, even if you don't succeed, we actually tried many things that didn't work. Google happened to work pretty well. But there are many things that we did that didn't, but we don't worry about those, right? Because we tried many things. So I just encourage you to take a little more risk in life. And I think if you do it often enough, it will really pay off.
Okay, so that's obviously Larry Page from Google, and the reason we like to show that clip is he was where you're sitting now, right? And he had an idea, and you heard him say he tried a bunch of different ideas. It really is intended to just encourage you. I think it's easy to see someone at my age or stage and say, yeah, well, it's easy for you to say that because, you are where you are now. But honestly, I think most extraordinary people, if you peel back the onion, you'll find very, very early they were out there. So I'm going to kind of go quickly through these last two things. I'm getting a little concerned about time. Yes? No? Okay, we're good. The fourth principle is reach beyond your bubble. And in essence, what that is about is innovations happen at intersections. It's basically a bunch of diverse perspectives, diverse people coming together around one idea, and the importance of having a diverse table. And by the way, this is critical whether you ever start something or not, no matter what body you find yourself in, sort of in an institution, make sure there's diversity of perspectives and diverse people around you. There's more and more data coming forward every single day proving that the most successful companies are companies that put a real emphasis on diversity. Thomas Edison and his muckers, even though they look like a bunch of old white guys, actually were quite diverse when you looked at what their fields of study were, what their perspectives were, where they came from. And the interesting thing about Thomas Edison is we're pretty sure that what he's left us with is actually a way of innovating. So Xerox Labs, Bell Labs, and even Apple itself copied what Thomas Edison did in his lab to find innovations. Time and time again, we see that reach beyond your bubble, diverse table as being a really important thing. So it was Melinda Gates who said, so hey, I'm in the middle of nowhere. How is it Coke can get here, but everybody's telling me we can't get our vaccines here? Maybe we should go to Coke and talk about having them help us play a role. A very non-obvious reach beyond your bubble. Who would have thought bring Coke into the world of getting to the last mile with great things that can benefit the world beyond Coca-Cola? National Geographic and Fox. National Geographic is a nonprofit. It's a 125-year-old institution. And when there was the new media coming along 25 years ago that was cable, okay, they didn't want to get disrupted from their publishing business. So they did a joint venture with Fox. And today that has sustained and scaled the organization beyond wildest imagination. Now, of course, they're going to face it all over again with technology as a disruptor. And they'll face again, who do they partner with? How do they reach beyond their bubble in the newest phase? President Bush and Bono and their work in HIV/AIDS and on debt in Africa and so many fronts. So who's not in your bubble? What skills and experience are you lacking? The easiest thing to do is, there's some folks here, I think, that are policy people. There are some focused on philanthropy, some on social enterprise, impact investing, a whole array of people in this room today. I think it's easier to say, okay, well, I'm an engineer and I know I need a marketer. It's not so easy to think about what else you might need in terms of a perspective. And the thing that really blows my mind about the work of changing the world, and it was one of the first things I noticed when we got involved in the work, was often the people that they're trying to serve aren't at the table with a voice or playing a role in what they're building. So I'll give you an example of how this plays out today in some cases. Social media companies. The majority of social media users are women. Look at how many social media companies have women on their boards or in senior management. Not a lot. That's slowly changing. But this is really about making sure, and at the Case Foundation we call this work citizens at the center, making sure that those you're trying to serve are at the table and with a voice. And so in your own life, whether it's personally and you're trying to do things or professionally and you're trying to do things, take stock of where your skills are and where your gaps are, and make sure you have people around you who fill in those gaps. And always make sure people are at the table that you're trying to serve. Let urgency conquer fear. So Barbara Van Dalen is a partner of ours. We angel funded her with an idea. I first knew her as nothing more, not that this is, I shouldn't use the term nothing more. I first knew her when she was a humble mental health counselor. Okay, she just saw patients. But what was happening? Remember I said innovators solve problems? Barbara, from her chair as a counselor, said there's a problem. Too many military families are needing this kind of access, and we don't have the capacity in the United States to provide it. I have an idea. She came to us with her idea. We angel funded it. It's called Give an Hour. Basically the idea that any mental health worker in the United States can volunteer an hour a week for military or their families. It helped close the gap when she got, actually that we're way past the 6,300 number of providers now. And most recognize she's filled an important gap in this arena. One individual, no business experience, had never written a business plan, just saw a problem that needed to be solved, and had the boldness to make the ask. And we said yes, and we couldn't be happier with Give an Hour. Nelson Mandela let urgency conquer fear. I don't know how many of you have read his biography. Gosh, it's certainly timeless. We believe that he hasn't just changed a nation, but I think when the story's finally written, he's changed a continent. Rosa Parks. Can you imagine being a young black woman in the South in the early 60s and needing to get on that bus and knowing what that was going to mean for you? What could make you do that? I'm not sure I could do that. But if I did, that was urgency conquering fear. And I'm sure there was plenty of fear. But again, most would quickly name her as playing a fundamental role in changing the future of civil rights through that one act. So these are the principles. Make big bets, make history, experiment early and often, make failure matter, reach beyond your bubble, and let urgency conquer fear. Now, normally I stop there, but we did understand that we have a lot of folks in the room that are focused on an area that we care a lot about, impact investing and social enterprise. So I thought I'd go through a couple of quick slides. On your seats, by the way, if you didn't see, this is a document that really was crowdsourced. We spent about 2 years as a team having dialogues with people with what I would call inside and outside the tent of impact investing. People who go like, huh, what? What's impact investing? To people who go, oh, I've been doing this, forever, the true pioneers. And across all aspects, whether they're in policy, whether they're investors, whether they're social entrepreneurs. So this really reflects a collective of voices around what is impact investing and what are some of the issues. And so a lot of what I'm going to be presenting this morning is borrowed from that work, and it's just important for you to know that these really aren't my words, but this is trying to reflect what we heard a burgeoning sector say about itself, and people sitting outside that sector, what they think as well. So, we're super animated by this idea the business and capital markets can be a truly powerful force for change. And I said before about some of the surprises I had as I came to philanthropy. So I spent most of my private sector career in technology. And then I come into philanthropy, and I found that, it's weird. The world kind of wants to leave the problems to nonprofits, philanthropy, and government. And nonprofits, philanthropy, and government, haven't really done a great job of inviting business and the entrepreneurial spirit to the table. So I think we've been believers in this sort of general concept for a long, long time. And the visual I often use to try to make it real, do you guys have a crew team here at UVA? Okay. So maybe you see them practice on the river. And, they're long boats, lots of seats, lots of rowers. And the way I always thought about it when I see those boats is that's what's been wrong in social innovation, okay? We have empty seats. We have seats that aren't filled. And so if you had 2 teams and one boat had all the seats, don't you think they'd go farther faster than the boat next to it that was missing seats? So we've been missing seats as we try to bring social solutions. And those seats are made up of business, capital markets, and, basically social innovation. This is what impact investing looks like. It's a nascent movement. It's been around for a while, but it hasn't organized yet. And you guys probably know this well. You can probably teach me some things based on what you've been learning in the classes. But we like to say there's sort of 3 ways to look at it. Impact motivated, you kind of want your money to go in the basic area of things you care about. You're impact committed, or you're impact certified. Impact certified is pretty straightforward. We would call that almost like the platinum of LEED certification, okay? Meaning that that's a B Corp, where there's no question that that company with intention, with transparency has said, I will measure according to these desired outcomes. We talked, before we came in the room, we were having a talk amongst some of us. I mean, there are huge sectors that will be disrupted, we hope, in the most beautiful way through impact investing and through social enterprises. Look at just some of these: health and wellness, education, microfinance, renewable energy. For the most part, those have been untouched by innovators. It doesn't mean that there hasn't been innovation, but they haven't been fully disrupted and technology used. Think in transportation, Uber, right? I mean, wasn't Uber like an obvious thing? And yet it took a long time before it came onto the scene. Okay, this is one way to think about sort of, again, organizing the idea of impact investing. Are you running a business in a way that has a positive impact in these ways? Or are you, through your core products and services, delivering a benefit to society? These are some of the companies we talk about when we use good case studies around impact investing. These are all B Corps, so they're in that platinum range we were talking about. Revolution Foods is a company we're invested in and we've been holding up for some number of years as a great impact investment. How many of you have heard of Revolution Foods? They deliver about 1.5 million healthy meals to our public school system every week. They've replaced the old tired tater tots and ketchup kind of meals in hope that we build sort of healthier diets in our children. And they're chef-inspired good foods. Solar City, we talked about that company earlier, and Greyston Bakery. Greyston Bakery has this wonderful tagline. It says, "We don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people." They really started to hire the unemployable, and they've done a terrific job of building a very competitive business. All right, it's pop quiz time. Who said this? Come on, fearless UVA. Take a guess. Very close. Mark Andreessen, but hold your thought, okay? Now, Mark Andreessen said this in 2013. In 2015, he invested in a B Corp. So we've seen some people come over to what we say is the other side. Guesses? All right. Bill Gates. And I don't know if you guys saw, but he made an impact investment in an India fund just a few months ago. Nancy Fund. You might not have heard of Nancy Fund. Nancy Fund was, pardon me, the first investor in Tesla. She owned the first Tesla. She has a fund called DBL Investors out in San Francisco, and it's all impact. And she is really considered, and the New York Times profiled her, and she's really considered one of the most successful impact investing fund managers. Okay, I'm going to look at you again, Mr. Warren Buffett man. That's Warren Buffett's quote. So we still have our naysayers, and he's a pretty big naysayer. But I'm pretty optimistic we're going to win him over before it's all said and done. This is my husband. I guess that's the second time he comes to us today. All right, so what does this all have to do with you guys anyway? Hopefully by now it's kind of clear. I understand, you know, from where you sit, it's a big old world, and sometimes after I spend time with students and we do this Be Fearless stuff, then I'll sometimes, you know, do small round tables afterwards or whatever, and I can almost feel like they don't want the weight on their shoulders of go change the world. But we do a lot of work with great people of your age and stage. And I believe you are the next greatest generation. You have a perspective on the world that the rest of us don't have. You see around corners and look at ways of solving problems like I and people like me can't, just because of sort of the baggage we bring to things. And so what this really is about is calling you guys. You're here. You know, you might have I had a challenged upbringing, and I turned that around to basically try to be passionate about empowering people, because I didn't feel that empowerment when I was growing up, and I didn't live in an empowered world. So you're here at UVA, and I don't know what challenges you've had or have right now, but I'm guessing you've had them, okay? But one thing is definitely true. If you're in this room, and I don't care under what circumstances you're in this room, you are privileged. This is an unbelievably great institution, and woo-hoo for you to get to walk its halls and have access to these, you know, wonderful minds, both around you and, you know, teaching from the head of the class. So use it. Don't be under-leveraged. Think about, no matter what world you go into, how can you change it for the better? In traditional institutions, as something you might start, in a nonprofit organization, I've tried to highlight for you just what some people have faced in their lifetime and how they've used their talents and skills and fears. You've heard time and time again, they've used fears to innovate. The Steve Jobs quote, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So I'm asking you to be crazy enough to think you can change the world. So your talents and skills, the world's needs, and your passion, the intersection of that is your purpose. And before I said I'm about being intentional on this point, please be intentional when you leave here today. If you haven't already given consideration to this, please give some thought to it. Understand where your purpose is, because where your purpose is most likely where you can be transformative. So what will fulfill you? I'm going to close
So given a time turner,
with J.K. Rowling.
I would tell my 21-year-old self that personal happiness lies in knowing that life is not a checklist of acquisition or achievement. Your qualifications, your CV, are not your life, though you will meet many people of my age and older who confuse the two. Life is difficult and complicated and beyond anyone's total control, and the humility to know that will enable you to survive its vicissitudes. If you choose to use your status and influence to raise your voice on behalf of those who have no voice, if you choose to identify not only with the powerful but with the powerless, if you retain the ability to imagine yourself into the lives of those who do not have your advantages, then it will not only be your proud families who celebrate your existence, but thousands and millions of people whose reality you have helped change. We do not need magic to transform our world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better.
I thought she could say it better than I could. So now go change the world. That's it for me, you guys. Thank you. So we have a Q&A time, Jade. How much time do we have? Okay, great. And I'm really hoping I hear from you guys. Yeah, okay.
Hello?
Hi.
Oh, great. Thanks for your talk. My question has to do with one of the pillars you talked about, civic engagement.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big problems with our generation is kind of lack of participation in democracy. What kind of innovations have you guys funded, or what are you looking to fund in that kind of realm?
Yeah. So, we kind of believe in democratizing everything, right? And so one of the things that we're really excited by is the empowering nature of technology to point the way to individuals to get engaged in things that they care about. Okay, and that, at the end of the day, is civic engagement. So social media, we think, can play a really strong role. And we've done some different pilots, and then we've published the findings of those pilots on the Case Foundation site. And if you want to refer to any of this material after this today, or look at any of the things I've referred to, there are a number of studies, it's casefoundation.org. But in that work, we've just found, so I chaired something called the President's Council on Service and Civic Participation, and it was about civic engagement at the end of the day. We did a big study on volunteerism, and you know the number one reason people volunteer? Because they're asked. It's like one of those, come on, it can't be that simple. But the bottom line is, social media and technology more broadly brings into play what I call word-of-mouth marketing into civic engagement. In the world I grew up in, before there was social media and before even online services were on the scene, if you were in marketing as I was, word-of-mouth marketing was the most powerful form of marketing. It said, you are my friend and you said something good about this product, that's the gold standard, okay? Then I'm probably going to go buy or try that product. We need that in civic engagement more broadly. We need to call our friends, our circles, our streams, if you will, into stuff that we care about. We need to build innovative ways to get those things in front of people, because what we found is when you actually provide that opportunity for people to see what their friends care about or are passionate about, and particularly if it resonates, but it doesn't have to resonate with something they care about, they'll actually go into it and discover it because a friend said, what about this? So I think if there's sort of any one thing that we're really jazzed by, it's that empowering potential nature. I will say, I also think, because we work so much with the generations in the room, and I think this is true across all generations right now, people are just really down on government. Well, I don't think we're going to change the world by just ignoring government. I think that we need great, young, fresh leaders to go into the public sector and policy, as I know some of you are focused on. Because if we're going to change the world, we need support from that sector too. So, you know, we host the largest millennial conference every year called MCon. And last year we had the guy who's in charge of sort of the hiring practices of the federal government. And he said only 8% of the federal government is millennials. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to change that up. Like, that is a noble, noble place that maybe you can take your innovative spirit and make a difference. Is it hard? Is it bureaucratic? It is. But those institutions need to change too. But I do think there's real power in sort of technology and allowing us to learn with a broader field about how we can get engaged. Yeah. You can probably shout it out. I can probably hear you, but...
So you're a women-led organization. Clearly your team is comprised of a lot of women. So I'm really interested in learning how you work to promote gender equality and female empowerment through your investing and other work that you do.
Yeah. So it's something we're super conscious of, and it's not really okay with us that we're so heavily women-led. We'd like to be a little more diverse on the gender side. Eric Broxus is with us today, and we tease Eric. He had a sick day on the day we did, he was really ill, the day we did that photo shoot, and we're like, but Eric, you're a third of our guys. We got to redo the photo shoot. But we are highly mindful of it, that we have to be diverse, and it really isn't on purpose that it's so female-led. I will tell you, philanthropy and nonprofit is heavily female-led. Healthcare, by the way, is another example of where there are a lot of women, and not just nurses. But what we really need to do is change these sectors that today have a large population of women and make sure that the leadership population reflects the larger labor force population. And I think that's true of all sort of sectors of underserved, if you will. If they're either being served or in the population, you need to make sure that the leadership is part of that. And I think that's happened at the Case Foundation. So, yeah.
So I guess you talk a lot about, and this is something that's been coming up all over the place recently, is impact investment, and that kind of implies that a lot of what the work you're doing is with small businesses or large businesses. Are there areas that you, or problems you think are best tackled by philanthropy, or problems that don't belong in the business sector?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hoping, and I spend a lot of my personal time on this, with the philanthropy sector. So take social impact bonds, and I know you guys have been studying them in some classes. So one of the things philanthropy has done with some social impact bonds, and it's huge, by the way. Okay, think of social impact bonds as unleashing private capital to solve problems, all right? Capital that otherwise wouldn't be in the business of solving these problems. Well, what philanthropy does, in some cases with social impact bonds, is they come in and they guarantee first losses, so that if it fails, the private capital investors don't lose their shirts, okay? So they cover what we call first losses. That's a terrific role for philanthropy to play. And why would philanthropy play that role anyway? Because guess what a grant is? A grant is 100% capital loss. You expect no return on that capital. So if you backstop a social impact bond, you're really only out that money if it fails. But guess what? If it was going to be a grant anyway, you weren't going to see any money back from it. So low risk for a potential high return on investment, because with that money you might have unleashed a lot of other private capital that would have sat on the sidelines. Does that make sense? Okay.
Good afternoon. So when it comes to impact investing, my interest is in a lot of global affairs, like investing in many developing nations.
Right.
So I wanted to know exactly what I guess you guys are doing in terms of the global field, because while philanthropy is good and everything like that, I don't believe that that is the only outlet that needs to be focused. Like, as you invest in a developing nation, I think the mission should not only be to, say, ensure that they have the tools and they do well for this particular project, but promote a culture of type of sustainability and, you know, infusing, like, I guess, democratization, and knowing that then, you know, you also get back on your investment at the same time you've, like, promoted a culture of work that keeps on working.
No question. And it's, you know, even before you get to the social impacts, the economic empowerment that can come to regions that otherwise don't have it is quite powerful in terms of transformation. So I also co-chaired something called the U.S.-Palestinian Partnership, in which we stood up a venture capital fund in Palestine, in the West Bank, okay? And I got mostly U.S. investors to invest in that. Do you know what that does in the West Bank when out the channel for entrepreneurs to build great companies and to spotlight their innovation and their growth? And we'll go to Nairobi later this year, and we'll do something similar, not a venture capital fund, but spotlight the entrepreneurs. But the other thing that's super cool is because the developing world doesn't have sort of our baggage here of either this is how it's done, or capitalism is the only answer, or like in the case of the UK or others, you know, maybe there's a history of socialism. These new countries are still figuring it out. So they're wide open to all kinds of ways we might go forward, and that could be super beneficial on the impact investing front. And I think we'll see a lot of really interesting things come forward. There's a lot of debate internally, like, you know, sort of the inside the beltway of impact investing about, will the US really emerge as the leader, or will another country? And it wouldn't surprise me if we really feel other countries nipping at our heels here. We already do to a certain extent, because a lot of these young sort of leaders, and particularly those that have emerged as successes in business, they don't want to go the old philanthropy route. They don't want to go the old government route. They know they made their money by being an entrepreneur, and now they want to see others in their country have that same opportunity. Definitely true in Africa. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not in control here. Wherever the microphone is.
Yeah, I'm Bailey. I'm in Professor Mahoney's Global Advocacy and Action class, and we've been talking a lot about organizations, foundations, just like the Case Foundation, and sort of their vetting process for how they choose the clients that they're going to work with. And I was wondering if you could speak to how the Case Foundation goes through that process.
Sure. Highly unusual for a foundation, I'll just tell you that at the start. And maybe before I say that, let me just say that when we talk about philanthropy, philanthropy really isn't one thing. We don't like the definition of it being just a bunch of rich people writing checks, which is why we've been so focused on democratizing philanthropy. But even within the institutionalized philanthropy of foundations, you have the traditional foundations where the entrepreneur who made all the money is long since gone, and now you have a class of people sort of shepherding those assets. Then you have folks like us, and they call us living donors. It means it's our money that we're spending, right? And we're engaged in the process of it. So we're much more willing to take risks because it's our money. You know, I often say if it's my $100, I'll take risks with it. But you give me your $100, and I'm going to grow very cautious. So we've kind of been super risk tolerant. We do a business plan competition every year where we take a look at the areas where we think we can uniquely add value. The teams come up with business plans, and they compete with each other for the investments, and that is how it's determined where we'll go forward and with what. And we're catalyst investors, so that means we're not going to sign off on something thinking that we're going to be at the table for 20 years. We generally are in for about 3 years, and what gets us more jazzed than anything else is what we call the OPA effect, which is other people's assets. We think if it's a really terrific idea, it should basically be a magnet for other people to get engaged and invest alongside of us. So we're catalysts, we're trying to shine a light, use a megaphone, celebrate great ideas, and invest in them early, and then get out and let others take them into the long haul. Does that answer your question? Okay. Does someone have a microphone?
Hi, Ms. Case. Thanks for being here with us today. I also have a question about impact investing. The biggest knock is traditionally that they don't offer competitive market returns, and I know a lot of research has disproved that recently. So that set aside, what would you say is the biggest cause for concern or downside to the impact investing movement?
Yeah, so it's an incomplete ecosystem. And the reason that that sort of exists as a problem we face, like, is it always concessionary, right? Is it always an investment where I can't make the same as if it wasn't impact? Is because we don't have enough data, and we don't have enough intermediaries and other tools that usually serve as a comfort for investors, okay, like rating systems, reviewers, et cetera. Those aren't out there yet in a big way for impact investing. So as you're even thinking about your future, no one's come up with a killer, you know, we won't say stock market exchange, but a rating system for impact investing. No one's come up with really strong sort of big data around impact investing. And it isn't a lack of willingness on the part of those that have done stuff to tell. It's just, it is not an organized market yet. And I will say to you guys, if you're interested in impact investing, I won't insist, but I'll come close to insisting that you watch a documentary called Something Ventured, and you can find it online. And it's the story of the venture capital sector before it became a sector. And I honestly believe you'll say, oh my gosh, this is just like impact investing is right now. It's the Wild West. It wasn't organized. There wasn't a policy framework for it. There was fear. There was, confusion around what it was. Just all the things we're facing right now that we're trying to sort of overcome and impact. And again, it's called Something Ventured, and it's actually entertaining too.
Early adopters and the users, and how the people that you invest in identify those people, the users, because as Steve Jobs said, sometimes the market just doesn't know what it wants.
Yeah.
Or it could usually use this. So I just think, what is the point of view? What is the point of view of the user and early adopters? And is it different for impact investing versus regular startups?
And you're defining the user in this context as
people who use the products and the services that.
Okay, yeah. So this is where I'm really encouraged, right? I mean, I really think the reason this impact investing world, which has been around for a while, okay, is catching fire is because of you guys, all right? I think millennials see the world differently, and they say to their employers, and they say to the companies that provide the products and services, we want to feel good about you. We want to feel like there's a benefit that happens. And, for me as a consumer, I say, all right, well, if I'm going to spend this $5 or $10, I can spend it over here, and okay, it might have worked fine for me, but nothing else great happened because of it. Or I can spend this $5 or $10 with this company and know that these benefits that is a huge return on investment in my $5 or $10. But you guys are driving that. These companies know, particularly the bigger companies, they know that they have to attract and retain, both consumers and talent in their fields, and they know that they have to adapt to some of these practices around sort of benefit to society. And it is your generation that's doing two things. They're the new generation of entrepreneurs who are building companies to change the world. So excited by that, okay? And a new generation of investors who, if you don't have money to invest today, chances are you might have talked to your parents or your grandparents or someone you know about, will you think about that? Should you really be invested in coal? Should you really be truly, so don't underestimate the influence of your generation and how this thing is playing out. But it's so early days and still lacking, as I said, so much organization as a market. But I'm cool with that, because anytime new movements, there's this period of messiness. And it's good to have the messiness before we just jump to this is how it's going to be done. Who has it?
Hey, I was the example with John Wheel showed there's a difference between measured risk and recklessness. I was just wondering, at what point do you think you draw the line between the two, especially in sort of uncharted territories?
I thank you for that question, and here's why. I get that question every single time we present these slides. And I was getting ready, I was thinking, ooh, so UVA hasn't asked the question yet. All right, so it's not the crisp answer you're going to want, but I'm going to try and provide it for you. I think a measured risk, the reason I walked you guys through that sort of discipline early on, a measured risk is a risk where you understand the upside and the downside, both of doing it and doing nothing. And that you have concluded, okay, that it's worth it. But at the end of the day, it really does lie in the eyes of the beholder. And I'll give you one quick example that I wanted to talk about, and I'm hoping I can do it really fast so we can get more questions in. So I don't know if anybody's heard about the polio virus being used in brain cancer. Okay, it's just a big story that came out. We funded that work in 2002 as an idea at Duke University. The idea of it is, so glioblastoma is a brain cancer. I sit on a glioblastoma board. It's a brain cancer. And what happens with all cancers is if you grow a tumor, for some reason there's almost this force field that forms around the tumor. So your immune system can't kill the tumor. That's why cancer kills us. It's really that simple. So the doctor down at Duke said, well, what if we injected polio into the tumor site? We think that will unleash the immunoresponse. Your own body's immune system then will kill the tumor. Well, you might imagine what people thought about us funding that. I mean, like still today, people think that that was a reckless risk that Duke took and we took. But Sunday night on 60 Minutes, they profiled 2 patients who are in remission. Their tumors are gone. One of them looking a lot like you guys. She's like 23 years old, okay? Gone. We've never seen this in GBM, ever, with that disease. She said she agreed to be in the trial because they told her she had 3 months to live. She knew she was going to die. So did she make a reckless risk, or did she make a measured risk? In her circumstance, she risked dying of the polio trial because she knew she was going to die anyway. And these are terrible stories to tell on this, but I think that really is, sometimes that's what these things come down to, okay? There were some patients who died in the trial, and they know they died from the polio infusion. But they corrected it. That's the point of a trial, is to find out what's going to work and what doesn't. They've corrected it now, and since they've corrected it, they've lost no patients at all, and they've had these 2 that have broken through. So the measured reckless thing, it is honestly a question every single time we talk about it. So all I can say is understand what the risk is, the benefits and the drawbacks. If you take the risk, the benefits and the drawbacks if you don't. And if you can come up with a model or a measure in your mind that says, that works for me, then that's a measured risk. Even if someone else, I think she took in her own mind a measured risk. To you, that would be a reckless risk, right? Because you're not going to die. So why would you let someone infuse, polio in you? So these things are not as black and white as we wish they were. But I do think there are ways you can build these disciplines to try to figure that out.
So I feel like something that comes to mind when you say impact investing is like helping developing nations and third world countries. But how much work do you guys do with sort of optimizing broken systems in already developed countries like the United States, where like obviously we don't have a malaria problem and obviously no one's starving to death, but maybe like the revolution foods where kids have access to food that's not exactly healthy food. Like how much work do you guys do in developed nations?
Huge amount in the U.S. Huge amount in the U.S. And I think particularly in the U.S. there is this view that it's government's problem or it's nonprofits' problem. So the potential upside for impact investing in the U.S. is huge, and a big part of what we're focused on is that. I sat on a task force for the G8 in which we wrote the policy recommendations for the U.S., and that's available on the Case Foundation site as well. The potential impact in the U.S. can be greater. Why? Where was the entrepreneurial spirit born in the United States? My husband likes to say, hey, we were a startup nation, and we were. The entrepreneurial spirit is in our DNA, man. And so I think it can be really great here, but what it requires us to do is kind of eschew or get rid of sort of the way we've looked at the world in the past about this is the role of government, this is what you do if you're, you have to leave all that behind and start fresh, and that might be hard for our country, but we think it holds great potential, and we're very focused on the U.S. Was that it? Oh, yay, okay, good. Yeah, so look at DBL. That was one I talked about, which was Nancy Fund. And by the way, she started out calling herself Double Bottom Line, and people were so worried that it was concessionary that she had to change. It's true. She had to change the name to DBL because they brought such bias that if it was called Double Bottom Line, the returns wouldn't be there. She's just raised a second fund. Revolution, I should point out, is not an impact investing fund. Revolution Foods won our investment against any investment. It wasn't, the fund itself is not an impact fund. It's just a great company with more than $100 million run rate doing really remarkable things that we think is going to break out. And it competed with all other companies. So not because it was impact. Yeah. Okay. So we have a principle that everything we do has to be cross-sector. So that means we have to have a private sector partner at the table. We have to have a public sector partner at the table. We hopefully have other philanthropies at the table. So it has to be all sectors, okay? So we are always working with other philanthropists and other philanthropies. I spend a fair amount of my time working particularly with newer philanthropists, okay, whether they have formal foundations or not, but as they're thinking about their philanthropy. To your question, is there enough collaboration? There's absolutely not enough. And I was taken aback, and sometimes still am, at the lack of collaboration. So you have foundations calling their NGOs to collaborate, but they're not so good at doing it. But on this point, I'm more encouraged than I've ever been. There's been a lot of movement in the last year or two. A lot of us have really rolled up our sleeves and said, come on, guys, we've just got to collaborate. And I feel better about it today than I have in all the years of doing this work. We still have a really long way to go as a sector. Oh, sorry. By the way, I'm going to stick around, so if there's anything burning that you guys, I'm happy to spend time. Yeah. How to do that? Okay. So probably the best way to do that is to email me, which is a big risk here in this big room. So my email is my name, which Jade and Eric are giving me bad looks. It's and I'll tell you why. It's Jean, Jean, @AOL.com. And, you know, if you send it to me, you must put UVA in the subject. And please don't hold me to a super timely response, or allow me, if I think someone on my team could do a better job of connecting with you, I'll pass it along. But I will make every effort to personally respond. This is a smallish room, and I would actually really love to hear from you guys. And not just now, but even as you're walking through life and you come up against those risks, or you failed, or you have an idea, and you just, you know, would feel better if you could bounce it, all right? And by the way, I'm actually really about phone calls, too. I'm better at phone calls just because I'm so overwhelmed, like you guys are, by my email all the time. And you can call the office and ask for me, and I will be happy to, you know, I have probably somewhere between a dozen and 2,000, or a dozen and 2 dozen, thankfully not 2,000, that I mentor closely. So I'm constantly talking to students about this is my challenge or this is my opportunity, and I'm happy to do that with anyone in the room, okay? So thank you very much, guys. It's been a real pleasure to be with you.